Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take the sources, the articles, and all the research that you've gathered, and we really we put it to work.
Right.
Our mission, as always, is to connect these threads that might seem totally separate and, unlock something new from what we thought we knew.
And today's deep dive,
Mm,
it's a really extraordinary exercise in, I guess, intellectual decryption.
it really is.
We're looking at something that, on the surface, seems purely artistic.
Mm.
We're talking about the Kandyan dance tradition and the Perahara festival in Sri Lanka.
Beautiful stuff.
Beautiful, but our sources are forcing us to look so much deeper.
Yeah.
We are basically decoding this entire cultural system as a deeply layered archive of suppressed warfare knowledge.
That core insight, that alone is just staggering when you pull it from the material.
Yeah.
You're talking about these graceful, rhythmic movements, the deep bends, the drumming, the way they hold their hands. And according to this analysis, they aren't just for show. They are detailed combat kata forms.
The complete fighting system, Angamapura.
And one that survived generations of, brutal colonial prohibition by hiding, by going into this deep cultural camouflage. It's like finding out a national treasure is actually an encrypted military manual, a living one.
That's the perfect way to put it. And that story of survival is what's so compelling. So to really get it, we have to look at 3 layers.
Okay.
First, we have to establish why this was even necessary, the severity of the colonial suppression. Why could they just, train in secret?
Go to stakes.
Exactly. Then second, we have to analyze the annual Perahara festival. We need to stop seeing it as just a parade and start seeing it as a functional, synchronized training system.
Like a physical networking event for
A
fighters.
distributed update system, yeah. And finally,
This is where I think the big aha moments are.
it is. We get into the nitty-gritty. The physical specifics of the dance moves themselves, the posture, the turns, the hands, to show how this whole fighting system was archived. Not on scrolls they could burn, but inside the human body.
An embodied archive. This is, I think, one of the clearest examples we've ever come across of knowledge transfer surviving organized state-level violence. It's incredible.
Let's get into it.
So we have to start with the history, right? Because the context really sets the stakes. The level of the threat dictated just how deep the secret had to be. And our sources, they focus on this really aggressive eradication of traditional Sri Lankan fighting techniques, this Angamapura by the British in the 19th century.
And it wasn't just a political disagreement. This was administrative warfare against memory itself.
Right.
What's so stark in the source material is the sheer administrative ruthlessness. This wasn't some local commander making a snap decision.
No.
This was systemic policy, handed down from the highest levels. We're talking about specific historical documents, letters, directives that are cited, and they confirm the intent was total erasure.
And we have names, right? We often hear about this stuff in vague terms, but the sources here are specific.
They are. The sources point to correspondence from colonial administrators in the region. Guys like Governor Sir Henry George Ward, and even earlier Viscount Torrington,
Okay.
and later the colonial secretary, Codrington. Their letters back to Britain, especially around the mid-19th century, the 1850s, they show this really explicit, detailed concern about the local fighting culture.
What were they saying? How did they frame it? Was it just rebellion?
They called the Angamapura techniques seditious practices, a threat to immediate stability.
So they knew what it was.
Oh, they knew. The fear was that these movements, which were incredibly lethal, could turn a seemingly peaceful population into an organized guerrilla force almost overnight.
Because it didn't require a lot of equipment.
Exactly. Minimal equipment could be practiced covertly.
Yeah.
They saw it as a uniquely existential threat to their control.
And the consequences for getting caught. How brutal were the orders?
The orders were explicit. They were designed to create terror. The sources confirmed the official decree was execution. Simple as that. If you were caught practicing Angamapura, you were killed.
Wow.
But they knew killing the practitioners wasn't enough. You had to destroy the entire ecosystem that let the art survive. And that's where the systemic nature of this gets really chilling.
They went after every pillar of it.
Every single one.
So, okay, they targeted the people. That's sadly expected. But the sources really highlight this destruction of the physical infrastructure. What did that look like?
It was incredibly comprehensive. First, the literal space. Any kind of dedicated training ground, a Kalari or something similar, was outlawed.
So if you own one, or even just let people use your land.
You were subject to execution. They understood that you need a dedicated space for
Mm-hmm.
community, for repetition, for that master-to-student knowledge transfer. So they took the space away. They forced the knowledge into hiding, into families, into private.
But the detail that just screams textbook counterinsurgency to me, the one that feels almost impossibly specific, is the criminalization of a tree.
The meat tree.
Yeah. The sources say owning a meat tree was made illegal. Why on earth would you target a tree?
It is the perfect, quiet example of attacking the logistical supply chain. You see, you don't always have to ban the weapon itself. Sometimes it's more effective to ban the things that sustain the warrior.
Okay, so what was so important about this tree?
The meat tree, or Matuca longifolia, produces seeds. And from those seeds, you get me oil. And this oil was essentially the entire medical and maintenance armory of the Angamapura tradition.
The whole armory in one oil. Let's break that down. What were its functions?
Okay, function number 1, wound care. This was their primary antiseptic and healing agent. You have to remember, they didn't have modern antibiotics.
So cuts, bruises, training injuries.
Exactly. This oil was critical for recovery. If you ban the oil, you make any injury far more likely to get infected, become a permanent disability, or even cause death. It just exponentially increases the cost and risk of practice.
Okay, so that's the medicine. What's function number 2?
Muscle recovery and conditioning. The oil was massaged into muscles, into joints. It reduced inflammation. It sped up recovery.
So let them train harder and more often.
Precisely. It let them maintain peak physical readiness. Without it, recovery takes longer, training intensity has to drop, and the skill itself starts to degrade over time. You're attacking their physical endurance.
And the third function, I'm guessing this has to do with weapons.
It does. Weapon maintenance. The oil was used to condition wooden weapons to stop them from cracking, but critically, it was used to prevent steel blades from rusting and to maintain their sharp edges.
Wait, hold on. Let me just process that.
It's a lot.
If you criminalize one tree, you have simultaneously taken away the fighter's pharmacy, their physical therapy, and their armory maintenance all at once.
Yes.
That is a devastatingly complete strategy. It's not just about banning the fight, it's about removing the very conditions necessary for combat readiness.
It's strategic genius from a counterinsurgency perspective. They knew if they couldn't control the people's minds, they could control the environment that sustained the fight.
And that level of pressure, that explains why the encoding had to be so extreme.
It had to be. When you're training, your weapons, your medicine is all banned. The knowledge has to move. It has to go from physical things like scrolls, which can be burned,
Is it tangible evidence?
into a format that is decentralized, that's impossible to confiscate, and is hidden in plain sight.
And that leads right to that cognitive principle from the sources, the beetle leaf analogy. That really provides the blueprint for how this works.
The beetle leaf ritual is the key. Yeah. So the sources describe this cultural practice of cutting the tips and corners off a beetle leaf before you chew it.
And there was a myth attached to
A
it.
very sticky myth. The story was that the leaf, which came from another realm, might have residual cobra poison on its tips. So you cut them off for safety.
But the real reason, the science, was totally different.
Completely practical. The truth was that the tips and corners of the leaf naturally have higher concentrations of calcium oxalate crystals, bitter irritants. And also, because the vines climb trees, rainwater would wash contaminants, bird droppings, maybe even trace amounts of venom from insects or snakes on the tree down to the lowest points of the leaf, the tips.
So eating the tips could actually make you sick or at least irritate your mouth.
Right. So the original reason this part of the leaf concentrates irritants is complex. It's scientific, it's fragile, and easy to forget over a few generations.
Well, but the myth, cut this off or cobra poison will get you,
is simple, emotional, non-falsifiable, and it instantly preserves the correct behavior. People keep cutting the tips off generation after generation, even if they've completely forgotten the original logical reason.
The why is lost, but the how survived.
The how survives. And that is exactly what happened to Angamapura. The combat manual, the strategy, the science behind the oil, the physics of the moves, that was all destroyed by the British.
They erased the why.
But the functional core, the movement, the rhythm, the body mechanics, was wrapped in this beautiful, untouchable cultural package of performance art. The body remembers the syntax, even if the mind forgot the function.
And that survival mechanism brings us to the counter-strategy. How do you not just preserve knowledge but update it when centralized training is a death sentence?
Exactly. The biggest challenge for any suppressed art is adaptation. How do you share new tactics across decentralized groups?
And the sources point to one answer, the annual Parahara tradition.
This is where the whole idea of the Parahara shifts. It stops being just a religious festival, and it becomes this profound act of strategic intelligence. The sources describe it as a networked training ground.
A scheduled system update for the entire fighting tradition, disguised as a parade.
A mandatory one. And the disguise was brilliant. The colonizers would have just seen it as, a quaint cultural expression. Maybe they even encouraged it for tourism. They would never have dared to ban a major religious procession.
So the code was hiding in plain sight, inside a protected cultural event.
Perfectly. And the sources say this was the gathering where different districts, different lineages would share new tactics, new attack movements, new defense movements.
Because they couldn't travel to a central training ground anymore.
No. So this annual permitted gathering became the one essential hub for knowledge exchange.
And it wasn't a quick event. The sources mention it lasting 10 days or more. That length of time suggests it was more than just a show.
The duration is critical. You can't just learn a new physical skill by watching it once. There has to be a process, a protocol.
So what would that protocol look like?
You can pretty much deduce it. The first phase would be observation and calibration. The different groups watch each other perform. They notice subtle variations in rhythm and sense a new move they haven't seen.
They're calibrating their own techniques against what's being displayed by others.
Exactly. Then comes the second phase, away from the public eye, exchange in mirroring. Over 10 days, there are countless opportunities for informal exchange. A quiet mimicry of a move, sharing a specific drum beat, maybe a practice session late at night that just looks like a friendly cultural interaction. It has to be absorbed physically.
And the final phase is locking it in.
Consolidation and archiving. The new moves, now absorbed and refined, get locked into muscle memory through repetition. The update is now part of that region's tradition, and it's safely wrapped back inside the art. The danger is gone.
So if the Parahara is basically a military formation on the move, let's break down the order of the march. It starts with sound, the Yakbera drums.
The sources are very clear. These are not just musical accompaniment. They're the first wave of an engagement. It's psychological warfare and a command and control system.
Psychological warfare, how?
Through low-frequency sound.
Mm-hmm.
We know the deep, low-frequency rhythms travel for miles, and they can physically affect the human body. They can alter your heart rate, your breathing. They induce anxiety and instability in the enemy long before they even see you.
That's fascinating. So the complex rhythms aren't just for music's sake.
Not at all. The complexity is for encoding commands. Think about it. You have all these different regional groups that need to fight as one.
You can't just shout orders.
No. So one rhythm might mean advance, another might mean flank left. The drums created interoperability. They allowed different styles to move as a single coordinated unit based on sound.
So the colonial troops hear exotic music, but the practitioners are hearing marching orders.
And fear induction,
Yeah.
yes. Then past the sound, you get the visual shock, the fire performers.
Again, to an outsider, it's just a spectacle. What's the hidden function there?
This is fire discipline training, but in public. It does a few things. First, it trains fighters to use flaming projectiles, arrows, siege weapons. That's crucial for night attacks.
And it also desensitizes them to being around fire in a chaotic situation.
Exactly. It's controlled chaos. It gets them used to the heat, the smoke, the unpredictable light, so they can maintain their formation and execute moves even when everything is literally on fire around them. It's training in control anarchy.
And then we get to the more obviously weaponized displays, the Macaulay display, the 2 sticks on a chain.
The Macaulay is probably the least disguised element. It's a complex, dangerous weapon, like a flail. The performance described in the sources is a full weapon proficiency test, hidden as art.
To the colonials, it just looks like a display of dexterity.
Sure, but to the practitioners, it's a live test of control, timing, momentum, all the things you need to not kill yourself with that weapon.
Right, one mistake and you injure yourself badly.
So the focus required for a beautiful, flawless performance is identical to the focus required for lethal, precise use in combat. The skill is the same. It's a functional archive of a weapon skill.
The colonial irony just keeps getting deeper. They were literally applauding the annual proficiency test for the very martial art they had banned and executed people for.
The preservation mechanism was nearly perfect, and you have to remember why. The training grounds were gone, the medicine was banned, the weapons were rusting away. The only reliable, portable, and untouchable storage medium left was the human body itself.
Okay, so let's get into that. Let's unpack the physics. We're moving from the big picture of the festival to the specific body mechanics that were secretly conditioning a fighter.
Right. And If you start looking at the choreography as art and start looking at it as, say, functional geometry, the combat purpose is just. It's unavoidable.
So where do we start? The foundation.
The foundation is the posture, the bent, grounded posture. The sources describe this requirement to get into a deep, low stance and, as they put it, bend down and, stay for hours at a time.
Just staying in that low coiled position for hours sounds unbelievably difficult. What is that actually training?
It's not about grace. It's endurance under tension. That specific posture is hyper-training your hips, your thighs, your core to be incredibly strong and stable.
For absorbing shock.
For absorbing shock, exactly. A blow, a fall, a sudden change in terrain. You need to be able to take that impact without losing your balance. This stance keeps your center of gravity low. It maximizes your connection to the ground.
It's basically a resistance exercise disguised as a static pose.
Precisely. You're building coiled potential energy. A fighter who stands upright is exposed. A fighter in this stance is low, coiled, and ready to string or recoil instantly. It's a state of constant readiness.
Okay, let's move to the hands. The small details are the biggest clues. The sources mention keeping the hand near the hip or the belt. It looks stylistic.
But functionally, it's pure muscle memory for weapon retention and readiness. Think about where that hand is. It's right where a scabbard would be, or the hilt of a sword, or a concealed dagger.
So it's drilling a subconscious habit.
A critical one. It's doing several things at once. First, it stabilizes the scabbard so it doesn't flop around when you move, ensuring a clean draw. Second, it guards the hilt. It prevents an opponent from grabbing your weapon. Third, it puts your hand in the perfect position for a super fast draw or a counterstrike. They taught this intuitively, so juniors copied seniors without ever being told, guard your sword.
And the shape of the hand itself is also specific. Fingers straight, tense, held together.
This is a lesson in functional geometry. It is not a soft, flowery hand gesture. By keeping the fingers rigid and aligned, you're conditioning the hand to be a single sharp instrument, a blade hand.
So it's about making the hand a weapon in itself, or at least a hard blocking surface.
Then it's also about drilling edge alignment. Whether you're empty-handed or holding a blade, this trains you to strike along a clean, straight line to minimize resistance and maximize impact. It's economy of motion.
Okay, now the big one. The absolute core insight into the movement. The spin. The sources make a huge point that this is completely different from something like ballet spotting.
The difference is function versus aesthetic. In ballet, you spot to maintain balance and flow. In Kandyan dance, the technique is that the body rotates, but your head stays locked on the target until the very last possible second.
And then it snaps back around violently.
Violently to reacquire the target on the other side.
That sounds incredibly difficult. Why that intense focus on keeping your eyes on the target?
It's textbook target retention for combat. It does two things. First, it stops you from getting disoriented. But second, and this is the critical part, you never lose sight of the enemy.
Because that split second you look away is when you get hit.
It's fatal. This spin ensures that even during a rapid defensive rotation, you know exactly where the threat is and where your next strike has to land the instant you stop turning. It's continuous situational awareness disguised as a twirl.
And the lethality is amplified because the movements are diagonal. The sources use the phrase chainsaw clearing radius. That's a powerful image.
It's a perfect description of the physics. The diagonal cut is, across almost every martial art, the deadliest angle of attack.
Why that?
Because it lets you use the full torque of your spine and your hips. You're not just using arm strength. You're generating maximum rotational power and transferring it into the weapon.
And it's aimed at the weak points of the body.
Exactly. The neck, the shoulder, the ribs. It meets the least resistance for the most damage. So when the body is spinning and executing these diagonal moves, it's creating this continuous high-speed hazard zone around the fighter. They're not just turning, they're drilling a rapid, multi-directional killing machine.
When you put all those pieces together, the posture, the hands, the spin, it's a complete system.
It is. And it was designed for resilience at a population level, not just for some elite warrior class.
How can we tell that?
Look at the costume. The movements are designed to be done in restrictive clothing, like a sari. And without armor.
Right. If it required armor, it would have been immediately visible and unsustainable under the ban.
By making it work in everyday clothing, you ensure that the ability to train and fight is available to the entire community. It creates population-level readiness. The skill is tied to the body, not to an arsenal.
And the psychology of it, the intense facial expressions during the sharp movements.
That's the mental conditioning. That visible tension, that focused expression. It's embodied intent. It's training the mind to go from 0 to 100, from stillness to full physical commitment instantly.
It's training out hesitation.
Because hesitation gets you killed. They're not just making a face for the performance. They are training the mindset needed for survival under extreme stress.
And finally, there's this idea of the costume as command, using the king's dress even for kids in practice.
That's about preserving the organizational memory. By having young practitioners mimic the dress and posture of an authority figure, you are teaching them leadership posture.
The physical presence of a commander.
The gait, the bearing, the way you hold yourself. You're ensuring that even if the actual leaders are executed, the knowledge of how to be a leader is passed down through physical mimicry. It's ingenious.
So if we bring this all back to that beetle leaf analogy, the genius of it all becomes so clear.
It does. The functional knowledge died, but the essential correct behavior survived as muscle memory.
The complex science of why you do it was fragile and was erased, but the simple ritual, the cobra myth, the beautiful dance was indestructible.
The exact same thing happened to Angamapura. The combat manual, the written strategies, the why, the colonizers destroyed that.
But the executable file.
The executable file, the rhythmic, repeatable, functional movements of the dance stayed perfectly intact. It was passed down through imitation and ritual, archived in the nervous system. The body remembers the syntax, how to move, even if the conscious mind has forgotten the strategic function of why.
So what this really all means is Kandyan dance is not just a piece of history. It's a successful act of generational resistance. It's a survival archive.
A compiled binary of a warfare system.
Yeah. The source code is gone, lost to the colonial bands, but the program still runs every single time the dance is performed. It's this quiet, persistent act of defiance.
And it shows you something profound about how humans adapt under tyranny. This pattern of hiding essential or dangerous knowledge inside untouchable art forms. It's a universal survival strategy.
It shows that civilizations don't always just collapse.
Sometimes they see the threat coming and they just go into stealth mode. They embed their most vital knowledge in a format that you can't legislate against, you can't confiscate, and you can't ban.
They hid weapons training inside of art, and their oppressors paid to watch it. It's just a remarkable testament to culture as a defense mechanism.
And it speaks to how efficient ritual is as a memory technology. It prioritizes keeping the correct, repeatable behavior over keeping the logical explanation. When the explanation itself is dangerous to possess, ritual becomes the shield.
This has been just transformative. We started by looking at a dance, and we've ended up with a profound lesson in military architecture, generational strategy, and the power of embodied knowledge.
And this really raises an important final question for you, the listener, to think about. If a suppressed martial art can survive for centuries by becoming just a dance, what other crucial survival skills or historical truths are we dismissing today? Because they're disguised as harmless culture or tradition or superstition.
Are we, in our modern need for a rational explanation for everything, deleting the very ritual layer that was designed to make sure that essential knowledge would survive anything?
Is something to think about.
Look past the surface.
Yeah.
Always look past the surface. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope this has given you a completely new perspective on history, culture, and the enduring power of the body to remember. We'll see you next time.